Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Chasing Chevy podcast. I am one of your hosts, Chris Stachiw from the Culture Cast, and I'm joined by my two good friends all the way from Cambridge and with Sean and Wake Up Heavy, Mark Begley.
I have no interesting quote this time.
With this movie, you didn't have a quote?
I know.
Jesus. And also, go ahead.
I was just sitting there watching it and going, oh, I got to remember to get my quote. And then I never did.
And also joining us all the way from the Projection Booth podcast, Mike White.
You can call me Ted Nugent for this episode.
Victor Hugo, maybe. God, oh, Jesus Christ. And yes, on this episode of the Chasing Chevy podcast, we are going to be talking about 1985's Chevy Chase vehicle comedy thriller based on the book of the same name, based on, in the heaviest of quotations, because in this movie, he doesn't have sex with a 14-year-old. We're talking about 1985's Fletch. So the film is directed by Michael Ritchie, written by Andrew Bergman, based off the book of the same name by Gregory McDonald. It is a long-running series of books. This is based off of the first book, not the chronological first book, because he would release two more prequel books before this book, explaining how he got himself into this situation. And the character in the film is played by Chevy Chase. The film also stars Jodan Baker, Dana Wheeler-Nicholson, Richard Libertini, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Tim Matheson. George Wendt is in there as well as Fat Sam. And the film is about Chevy Chase playing the titular Fletch, a investigative journalist who stumbles upon a beach drug front problem and then is hired to kill a man sight unseen who has been looking at him all week on the beach, and he thinks he's a drifter, so he hires him to kill him, and that's where the intrigue begins. So I'm going to kick it to you first, Mike. Thoughts on Fletch?
So it took me a long time to finally watch Fletch, and I knew that this was a favorite of yours, so I finally sat down and watched it. Yeah, just a couple of years ago. Maybe I could go through Letterboxd. I don't pay for Letterboxd, so I don't know if I can actually see when the first time
I think you can.
Yeah,
maybe
you can too.
So, but this was my second time watching it. Put up my Chasing Chevy Chase hat and sat down and watched this one. Also listened to the book. I always wanted to hear how the book was. I was very familiar with the book covers for Fletch, just because Gregory McDonald is pretty close to John D. McDonald, and I was been looking around and used bookstores and kept coming across these Fletch books. But
how do you think I read John D. McDonald by accident?
See,
literally that. It's literally that. Yeah.
And then I don't know where Ross McDonald fits on this whole thing, but at some point we're going to have to talk about a Ross McDonald project here. But yeah, I think that Andrew Bergen did an amazing job adapting this. I think that he really outdid himself with the way that he crafted this screenplay, the way that he changed up what was going on in the book. I know we'll talk about that later on a little bit more, but yeah, I had a lot better time watching this the second time than the first time. And this is another one of those kind of like Vacation, where I'm like, oh, I can see where this could be somebody's favorite movie easily, especially if we grew up with it. I could see where, it's very quotable. And really, I think this might be the ultimate Chevy Chase movie.
What about you, Mark?
I think I've mentioned that it's one of the ones that I haven't watched all the way through. I have seen quite a few of the scenes on their own in various ways. I feel like I may have, although last night when I was watching it, there was a lot that was totally unfamiliar. I may have seen it at a friend's house back in high school or college, because I know a couple of my high school friends, this was their movie. Caddyshack was kind of my Chevy Chase movie at the time. This was their Chevy Chase movie, and they would quote those lines, steak sandwich, et cetera, all the time. And I feel like at some point, one of them had to have had it on when all of us were over, but I never actually have sat myself down to watch it on my own on purpose before doing it for the show. And like Mike, I can see why this would be a favorite, and especially for teen boys, that sort of I'm the smartest man in the room attitude, but not really the smartest man in the room. And I think that works well with teen boys in particular. Not that teen girls or older women or old men can't like this movie, but it hits that demographic, I think, pretty hard. It's not, of the movies that we've seen, it's definitely one of the better, but it's still not my Chevy Chase movie. I enjoyed it. I get a little tired of his constant sort of over the shoulder remarks It just doesn't. They don't hit with me very, very hard. I don't know.
I can totally see that. I just think that this role matches his skills better than anything that we've seen so far.
And I believe he feels that way too.
Yeah. How about you, Chris? Tell us your long and sordid history of Fletch.
Sordid. This is one of those movies that I saw on DivX growing up. And there was like a large group of movies that I remember seeing on DivX growing up that have made a significant impact on me. This was one of them. Mallrats was another. Basketball was another. I mean, yeah, this is one of my favorite movies. I just to get it out in the open and out in front of it, I've done an episode on Fletch before on the Culture Cast with Father Malone. We did an episode on, I think, Fletch Lives. And then I know we did Confess Fletch, the one that came out with John Hamm, I think 2 years ago. Yeah, I mean, this is one of my favorite movies. I think this is up there for one of my favorite comedies. I mean, I agree with both of you that Chevy Chase, I think this is the best he's been. I think this is the best. I think I agree more with you, Mike, than Mark, but I can see where you're coming from, Mark, obviously. I think this is the best thing we're probably going to watch the whole time we watch anything here in terms of it being the fit for Chevy Chase. Because I think that this role is the role for him. He's a single guy. He's a smartass. He's motivated at his job, but not too much. And he has a devil may care attitude about pretty much everything. So I like the character a lot. I think Chevy Chase works in this role. I mean, again, I think we talked about it when we did Vacation. Like, it's hard for me to take this guy seriously as someone's dad, but I can take him seriously as a single investigative journalist who's been divorced and his ex-wife hates him and, all these things. I could believe all of that because I don't know, Chevy Chase just has that energy, which is fine. I mean, some actors just have that energy. Another actor that I think about when I think of having a specific kind of energy is William Hurt. He always has a very specific kind of energy in everything that he's in, and it is always very muted for the most part and very reserved. Chevy Chase, he always is kind of doing the same thing. I mean, at this point, we've all said as much or alluded to as much in our show, but this is the first time where it's like, yeah, he's kind of just the solo man doing his own thing. And I think for whatever reason, that works. I mean, again, he needs to be kind of aloof at all times for his style of characterization to work. And I think it works here. And yeah, I mean, I understand also, Mark, where you're coming from with the like over the shoulder comments being a bit much or anything like that. Like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pup and taco, don't talk to me like that, ass face. I don't work for you yet. Like, there's a lot of that in the movie. And obviously it can become a lot too much for some people to handle because, again, it is just kind of, do you own rubber gloves? I rent them. Like, shut the fuck up, dude. Like, but like, I get it. But at the same time, that for me is the appeal of the character. But I understand also like just finding it to be at times grating, if not just like, can you just stop for 2 seconds? It's like the thing that we've seen with Chevy Chase where he bumbles and fumbles around. It's like, okay, we've seen this before. We don't need to see you do it every movie that you're in. And he does it here too. But yeah, unfortunately, again, I'm a little biased, so I'll be as unbiased as I can in this episode. And I've been able to do that before when we talked about Fletch. But yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorite comedies, and I would put it at the top of the pile for stuff that Chevy Chase has done. Yeah, 100%. And yes, I saw it as a teenage boy, Mark, so thank you for calling me out directly.
Hey, at least there was no Gesundheit line in this one.
Yeah.
I was waiting for that.
Did he drop something and then like pop back up from the bottom of the frame and like kind of bobble it? Because I don't remember that. That's another thing that I don't see.
He gets his head caught in that like ceiling lamp at one point.
There you go.
That's about as much as we get in terms of like pratfalling nonsense. And then at the tennis court, I guess.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned that about not being able to see him as a husband and dad. And I think, I don't know if it was after the last recording, it was sometime fairly recently, I stumbled on either a post on Instagram by him or by his wife or by his daughter. And I was not aware of this, but he has been married to the same lady since 1982, and they have like 2 or 3 daughters. He has a house of women.
He's a girl dad.
And his Instagram is just like all about them. And I was like, it just didn't jive with the image that I think you're kind of, reporting on here that you get from his films. And it was interesting. I had no idea. Not that I thought, he had, was running through the divorce mill in the 80s or one of those types, but I don't think I've ever heard anything about his family life since I've been a fan of his since the late 70s, early 80s, and that he's longtime spouse and girl dad, like Mike said.
Well, it's interesting because, again, I think the way he has portrayed himself and been portrayed in things would lead us to believe otherwise. But I don't know. I don't know if he's ever been problematic for any reason other than his own reason.
Yeah, he slips in it all the time.
Yeah, it's his own fault.
That's why you would think that he's a fuck up in his real life, because it's like, oh, well, I'm going to leave SNL because I'm bigger than this show. I'm going to call Cary Grant names on a public television show. I'm going to, I mean, if he didn't have a drug problem, surprise. But it feels like Chevy Chase was probably doing some Bolivian marching powder during the 80s.
Yeah, some nose candy.
I'm pretty sure that's.
But the thing about Fletch that I really clicked with this time is that it's a very solid story. And I think, that all of that, well, a lot of that goes back to, I almost said McDonald. Why am I blanking? Gregory
McDonald or Andrew Bergman?
Okay. All of that goes back to, I guess it is McDonald. All that goes back to McDonald, but then with Bergman, he really does a great job of pulling it together even more. So in the book, it's two very separate mysteries, but it's very smart that he takes that separate mystery, makes it into part of the first mystery so that it's just one big story, and that it helps Fletch move into the story from a different angle rather than the one that he had where he just was completely stuck being out on the beach, this whole drug story that he's investigating. Eventually, when he gets approached by Alan Stanwyck, that the Tim Matheson character, that suddenly opens up another way into this mystery because he tied the two things together. Bergman tied the two things together. In the book, they are two very separate things, and they eventually get tied together. Spoilers for Fletch, the book. They eventually get tied together because in the book, Fletch is blonde and Stanwyck is brunette. That's right. And then Stanwyck dyes his hair so that he can basically impersonate Fletch. He's going to fly to Buenos Aires with his childhood sweetheart and her son. And then that's when the Joe Don Baker character shows up and just shoots right through the chest of Alan Stanwyck, thinking that he was Fletch. So he didn't get a good look at him. And that's how the two cases come together. Yeah. Otherwise, they were completely unrelated. So I like that Bergman combines those two things, and really, I think that's very smart. I always like that these two cases are actually related type of thing. I mean, I'm a big fan of LA Confidential. Your case is my case. But it's just one case.
And I like that about the movie. I mean, you're completely right. I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you actually take Chevy Chase out of this movie and put someone else in who was not nearly as comedic, and I'm not saying with the same script, I'm saying take the fact that it's a comedic actor out, which means the script will not be nearly as comedic, if at all. And I think it's just a solid, like, journalist story, really. Like, because again, I mean, there are times where he is threatened with his life that don't feel like put-ons, especially with the Joe Don Baker character. And yeah, there are some stakes to it. And like you said, they do have this kind of through line between the two, which I am like you. I appreciate that immensely. I think that's well done storytelling. And yeah, Andrew Bergman, I think a lot of the credit for this movie has to go to him, because like you've alluded to, the book's great, but the book is very different. The book is very dark. I mean, he fucks a 14-year-old in the book, and he has really no compunction about it. Like, it's just kind of part and parcel of the job, is the way he makes it kind of sound when he's describing it. Because in the book, it's just he's a very different character. And I don't even when I've because I listened to all the books a couple of years ago, I don't even see Chevy Chase in the role in the book. It's such a different character. And it's, the first couple books existed before the movies came out. And then the other books start coming out after the movies have come out. And so the character feels a little more in line with Chevy Chase once you get past the movie books, or after you get to the books past the movie. But yeah, I never see him as that character when I read the books. It's such a different... He's not as comedic in the books, and it's not as like broadly comedic. It's more wryly comedic. It's a little bit of kind of, he's, Ted Nugent or something, but then he's not showing up like a giant fucking 10-gallon hat and a mustache. I mean, that's that's the thing. In the movie, there's a lot of the physical comedy is added into it, which kind of allows for Chevy Chase to. There is some physical comedy actually. There's a thing where he's stepping on where he's like fumbling and bumbling around, getting dressed up as like a nurse and stuff. I mean, there is some of it, but for the most part, this movie leans heavily on the fact that Chevy Chase is a comedic actor and takes the narrative in a direction that the book would never have gone, because that character is very different.
It is strange, though, in the movie, just the level that he goes to. Like, yeah, he puts on some scrubs at one point, and but for the most part, it's, oh, I'm this name, I'm that name kind of thing. Then suddenly he puts in the big fake teeth in the wig.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay. Really upping your game here for no real good reason other than just to be funny, I guess. And then he goes for a few more, like, oh, I'm so-and-so, oh, I hit a water buffalo. Can I borrow your towel? All these things. And then suddenly at the end dresses up as, basically he looks like Richard Libertini. He when he's in that like guru skateboarding or roller skating outfit, I was just like, wow, you really outdid yourself just to go back to the beach here, Fletch. And I don't even know if there was a reason why Fletch had to be in disguise to go back and talk with Gummy at that point.
Well, I think it went back to the last time when the cops kind of beat him up, took Gummy away. That was but the get up itself seemed a little excessive, because he hadn't really, other than the airplane mechanic or whatever he was trying to do. I'm like, why are you, these people don't know you. Stanwyck does. I guess maybe it's in case Stanwyck was there or something, but I always think in my head that every scene is going to include a costume or a disguise, because I have seen those particular bits where he is, or they were in the ads, or, when they show clips from the movie, they show the Lakers game, which is really just a fantasy, but you always see that image of him in the afro. Thank God they didn't put him in blackface.
Oh God,
yeah, because they mentioned something about him growing up in Harlem in the voiceover, the sports commentators lines there, and I'm like, oh, thank God they didn't do that. Yeah, I always felt like, oh, he's in a disguise every time because that's just part of his shtick, but it's really not. It's sometimes he's that, sometimes he's just dressed a little differently. But yeah, when he rolled back into the office with that beard, I'm like, oh, was he supposed to be his boss, Libertini in this with the bald patch and the big beard?
Glad it wasn't just me.
Yeah, no, oh yeah, he kind of looks like him, but the outfit sort of threw me off. But
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that point you made about the end of the book where the cop shoots Stanwyck on accident is so much more poetic, and but it makes me think of how Silence of the Lambs was streamlined so well for a movie where they kind of cut some of this and took out a lot of the Catherine stuff and added to this other character because it makes more sense. Then I'm like, oh, okay, it makes sense that these converge at the end, because I was like, are they going to shoehorn these together or do these stay separate? And then when they showed Joe Don Baker in the car that Stanwyck was walking back to, I'm like, oh, okay, so we're connecting these.
Right.
I had no idea about whether they were in the book or not. But
when Burton Gillum is like, oh yeah, he drives so much he could be flying to South America, I was like, oh, okay.
Right. Yeah, he uses so much fuel, and then I was like, "Oh, well, that's what he's part of the thing too."
Right.
So then, was it by chance that he picked Chevy? I guess it was.
It's supposed to be, literally. It's supposed to be chance.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, and that's another thing that they change, which is for better or for worse. Which is so in the movie, it's Mrs. Stanwyck that gives Chevy a suit and says, oh, you're about the same size as Alan, you're about the same height. In the book, it's after they fuck, she goes, oh, you've got the exact same bone structure as Alan. So she's much more chaste in the film, which I think just speaks to the era that we were in at that point. She was not out there for hunting for bear, as it were, and which she definitely is in the book. She is flirting with him incredibly much in the first time that they meet, and then of course they end up getting together. But I have to say, haven't seen nearly enough Dana Wheeler Nicholson because I thought she was great in this movie.
She had a real genuine like effervescence or something, and it seemed like she was genuinely cracking up at just, sort of out of character cracking up. And I don't know if that's just good acting or if she really was, but she just had a pleasant demeanor and put up with the snarkiness really well. Plus, she also has a subtle kind of similarity to Beverly D'Angelo. So it's almost
you said it.
I can see
kind
that.
of go on down the line here.
I actually prefer her chemistry with Chevy Chase to Beverly D'Angelo's because I feel like she actually pushes back on Chevy Chase a little bit.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate because, again, the thing about the character of Fletch really is the best characters are the ones that push back on his bullshit and don't let him just kind of walk all over them with it.
Right.
So she's great. I mean, everybody in this movie is great. I mean, you've already mentioned Burton Gilliam, who many of us from
one of those
the
guy movies.
Yeah, many of us from North Texas will recognize Burton Gilliam as the guy who sells Fords now, which is a real thing because in Texas he goes, doesn't matter how you get here, folks, just get here. And it is literally Burton Gilliam dressed up like his character from Blazing Saddles too, on top of everything else.
Take a letter to the main office and tell him I said, ow. Send wire, main office, tell him I said, ow. Gotcha.
He's great. I mean, Emmett Walsh has a great scene with Chevy Chase, the Moon River. I mean, my God. Kenneth Mars, another person we've seen in a bunch of things. What kind of name is Poon?
Elias looked up at me and he said his name at the beginning of that scene. I'm like, yeah, I think you heard that correctly.
Freaking James Avery showing up in here too. I love that, man.
William Sanderson's in here too as Swarthout of all things. Just like there's a random cutaway to William Sanderson on the phone.
For a second, I thought it was our man, Tracy Walter. And I was like, oh, another one. And then I was like, oh, no, it's the other guy. And then we, Tony Longo,
Tony Longo.
Just a year prior was playing a high school senior in 16 Candles.
Wow. And how strange is having Gina Davis in here? Her role is Larry, and there is no Larry in the book. So I was like, was she Larry in the screenplay and they just gender swapped, like just brought her in? Because he doesn't have an assistant, doesn't have anybody. It's just him. And also going back to the book, sorry to keep doing that, he fucking hates his boss. And she does that stupid thing that Libertini doesn't hear by putting out, like, feeling out the story and seeing if the cops have something to comment on, which almost gets him killed. And in the book, he's super angry at the woman editor, but I think he barely does anything to Richard Libertini in here. And I think Libertini, his character should have been way smarter.
Yeah, as opposed to telling the cops, just outing Chevy. Yeah, it's so weird. That's one of the weirdest story beats for me because, like, you know that this guy does investigative journalist under a pseudonym, and just to be like, hey, by the way, L.A.
Why would you tip your hat? It didn't make any sense to me either. I'm like, that seemed really, really dumb.
Yeah, it's the one part of the movie that, I mean, I like the scene with Joe Don Baker in his office. I hate Tommy Lasorda. He punches the fucking thing. Like, that's all, those interactions are great. But it always, in my mind, feels really forced because of Richard Libertini's character making a bizarre decision that makes no logical sense in the scope of the script. And especially given, if this were a serious story, your editor would not do that. It's almost like it's done because it's a comedic story. But that scene is like oddly not comedic when he's like in the jail cell. He's like, I'm going to stick myself with this knife. I'm going to shoot you in the head. Like, whoa, movie. Like, what the fuck? Calm down. But that's the thing. Like, it's weird because those two kind of things don't rub well together. And it's those scenes in this movie that, for me, watching it this time, they didn't work because I was like, why is this in this movie? Like, this is not needed to, the stakes are already there. We know that there are stakes here. And I don't think his editor outing him is a good idea. And it makes no sense from a story perspective, even.
It's a little heavy. It gets a little heavy for the rest of the tone of the movie, but I thought, I can handle those diversions every once in a while, and if it makes sense. But yeah, it seemed a bit much for up to that point, to the rest of the tone of the film.
It was just giving me a little PTSD. The first time I ever got into a car accident when I was 16, and the cops are questioning me, and they apparently didn't like my attitude. So they're like, we could take you out someplace and beat the shit out of you, and it would just be your word against ours. I'm like, wow, I was 16 years old at the time.
Holy shit.
Really didn't like cops ever since then. So, hey, Kev.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. I don't like cops either, and I really don't like them now. Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is also, I mean, again, the LAPD dirty cop thing. I do like that bit. I mean, I do like the idea that, these, I mean, again, cops don't get paid enough, right? So this is how cops, at least these kind of corrupt cops make up the differences, selling those drugs on the side. But
it's amazing. Sorry, real quick. I was just looking up Gina Davis's career, and before this, she was just doing tiny little things like, showing up in Riptide, Buffalo Bill, which we said, like in all these episodes of Buffalo Bill, Knight Rider, Family Ties. And then it's like she hits Fletch. And then the next movie, our favorite, Chris, Transylvania 65000. And then boom, it's like The Fly, Beetlejuice, Earth Girls Are Easy, and Accidental Tourist. And I think she gets an Oscar nomination for Accidental Tourist. It's like, what a run she just
speaking of William Hurt.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, she's great. I mean, she's great in this, but this comes so early in her career. Like, yeah, but she is a standout in the movie, which I think also helps with where she would be going with her career. Because Gina Davis is I consider her to be she's one of the great actresses, period. But yeah, this seems to be kind of a turning point for her career. Now, George Weiner, on the other hand, maybe not so much. I love George Weiner as the attorney who's just waiting out on the lanai, as one would say.
Lanai. Yeah, there's. I don't know if you guys had a chance to look at the extras, but there's some really good extras for this on the Kino Blu-ray, including one. I mean, it's a really great making of, but they have this wrapping story of, I'm going to be Fletch and I'm going to track down all these people. And it's just really embarrassing. The interviews are great, but the host, and just the way that the host is kind of shoehorned in there, because you can tell he's not where all of these interviews are taking place. And I wonder if something happened and they had to hurry up and replace them. But yeah, that was bad. But yeah, I was amazed at how many people they got for these extras to talk with them. I mean, they didn't get Gina Davis, but just about everybody else. Yeah. Oh, and Chevy Chase. Of course, I couldn't get Chevy Chase, but this was when Libertini was still with us, so that was good. The extras helped me with was, so in the poster, there's all of the little IDs of the people, and you see everything other than the hockey one, I think, right? You don't see him play hockey in the movie?
That's right.
Okay, and I know that on the extras, they had deleted scenes, and there was one of him with Tommy Lasorda. There's him in the hockey outfit, so there was a lot more to that. So it kind of goes back to what we were saying, Mark, as far as I expected disguises all the time.
Well, and then I think Libertini mentions when he's kind of running through the checklist, the itemization, that there was a gorilla suit. So I was curious. I'm like, was that a cut scene?
Well, and then you have the I would say the part of the movie that feels like, again, another like, why is this here? The thing with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chevy Chase all of a sudden just starts daydreaming that he plays for the Lakers. 6'4" with the Afro 6'7". It's so weird because, again, like it what does it have to do with anything? I don't know, but
he does talk about the Lakers a ton,
right? Well, that's but that doesn't mean he plays for the Lakers.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, the thing on the wall in his apartment. I always wanted that as a kid growing up. I was like, that is the coolest shit. Where he just has the basketball fall down. It's like, this guy's like an adult man child. Like, know, yeah. I don't understand. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I wonder how many takes it took for him to do the swish when he's walking through the door with the beer.
I don't know how they never thought Ryan Reynolds couldn't play Fletch. Like,
I could see that.
Because like in the day and age that we live in now, where you and I are going to record an episode talking about the latest Deadpool movie after we're done with this, pithy, smart-ass characters are still a thing. They're more a thing now than they probably ever have been, given how popular a character like Deadpool is. And in a lot of ways, this version of Fletch in the movie is Deadpool adjacent. Like, again, he doesn't necessarily break the fourth wall, but he does. because he narrates it. So that's technically like fourth wall breaking. So I don't know why they never went to that. Well, I mean, it makes sense who they got. I mean, John Hamm's great in the role, but Chevy Chase, I think, embodies the role in a way that it's hard to divorce him from this role in terms of all the things that he's done. This is the Chevy Chase role for me. And I understand why for so many other people it is too, but it is a specific note. It's almost one note that he is playing the whole movie, which is fine. But that one note just seems to work better than I think a lot of the other notes that he's being forced to play in something like Modern Problems or Under the Rainbow, as it were.
Very true. And the End of the Rainbow episode just dropped, so I was kind of listening through it, and I was like,
Well, and the other thing is, and we talked about
the narration again.
Right.
Narration.
And Mike, you and I talked about this a couple weeks ago. This movie also is very similar to Beverly Hills Cop. Like,
oh yeah.
Like he's a journalist in this movie, not a cop. But I mean, Axel is doing all of the, he's doing the disguises without the disguises, I guess.
Yeah.
Impersonation.
Making up characters on the spot. But Chevy Chase takes it upon himself to dress up like the characters. Axel F never does that.
At times. That's
we were talking about that when you were off camera. Sometimes he's disguised and sometimes he isn't.
Right. That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that really helps tie these movies together is that incessant Harold Faltermeyer score too.
Oh my God.
Okay. I love the Harold Faltermeyer score.
I mean, it's great,
but it is very much
a lot. Yeah.
Of the things that I remember about this film, once that started playing, I was like, oh my God. This I know, and some of the scenes rang a bell, but by the end I was like, I'm ready to put a screwdriver in my ear.
Wow, Jesus!
It's funny to see.
It's incessant.
No, I get it. I mean, it is like they don't go back to anything else really, other than a couple like songs made for the movie. So
it's funny that the one person they were talking about possibly casting, because they threw around like Jeff Bridges, Charles Grodin, even early on, Burt Reynolds and Mick Jagger, which seems weird. George Segal. But the one that they threw around was Richard Dreyfuss. And it's funny because as I was watching it this time, I kept thinking of The Big Fix, the Richard Dreyfuss movie from 78, I want to say, where he played a character named Moses Wine. And he has that same kind of quick patter, like his arm was broken in that movie. And whenever somebody asks him, how'd you break your arm? He comes up with a different story that kind of ingratiates him to the person that he's talking to. So reminds me of this whole, I'm going to keep bluffing and bluffing and bluffing and coming up with crazier things. The thing I liked, again, sorry to keep doing this, but going back to the book, some of the names he chooses are crazy as far as like the last name will be really long or something very difficult to say, but he doesn't go with the like Ted Nugent or, the names that people would know. Yeah.
Right.
In the next movie, he says Victor Hugo. That's it's like, or no, is it this movie he says Victor Hugo? No, he says it to Jim Swarthout. He goes, I'm Igor Stravinsky. Which is like, there's no universe where someone wouldn't be like, your name is Igor Stravinsky. Like,
right.
Really? Parents big fans of classical music or?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like a better when he makes them up, like with the, what is it, John Hasten.
John Cotoston, Scotch. It's Scotch Romanian. Right. It's a weird combination. So were my parents. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the other issue. I mean, when you take this idea and update it, you can't do those names anymore. You can't have John Hamm saying, my name is Axl Rose. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like So yeah, the new movie ends up being more like the original books because it, like you said, Mike, it's more about like just making a character. That's Axel in Beverly Hills Cop never said, "Oh, I'm Richard Pryor." Like, there's none of that. He just makes up a character on the spot and goes with it. And yeah, that's when I think Chevy Chase is at his best in this movie, and that's when the character is at his best. Is when it's with Kenneth Mars or with Burton Gilliam. And again, with M. Emmett Walsh, it's great. But yeah, then there are some of those like Ted Nugent. It's like Stanwyck would look at him and be like, your name's Ted Nugent? What the fuck?
Right.
Like,
well, and I wonder if his name's Stanwyck just because it's such a double indemnity type plot,
Right.
Well, I want you to kill me kind of thing. I'm like, it's a very classic film noir, which I thought was great.
Yeah, I mean, again, if this weren't a Chevy Chase movie, this would be a lot more hard boiled and a little bit more noir facing. Because I think it's noir adjacent. It's light on it. I mean, it wants to get there, but I think in terms of what it's actually trying to do, it's trying to be a funny movie, not like a thriller. But the thriller parts are so kind of intriguing and well done that I kind of wish there was more of it, which is, again, what kind of the new Fletch movie does. It kind of makes a case that, like, yeah, the character can be reinterpreted in an interesting way. Because Greg Mottola does a great job of taking the character and not just having it be a gag fest every 5 seconds, saying wild nonsense. And the other thing is Chevy Chase, I feel like he plays it straight for the most part. That's the other thing. When it doesn't work when he's not playing it straight. When he's kind of like wryly staring at the audience and like winking at them about these names, like the Ted Nugent thing. It's like, this just doesn't work it just doesn't work as well. Logically, for me anyways.
Well, the Stanwyck, to go back to that real quick, because that made me think of and it's in the script, they put a point on, he spells it out, W-Y-K, no C. And didn't Barbara Stanwyck's name have a C in it? So it's almost like they're pointing it out that, we're going there, but not quite.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Good call, Mark.
And I didn't notice, is there narration at some point in the script? I didn't make it all the way through because as I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is like almost exactly like the movie. The final draft was, at least, but no narration. So I don't know if it kicked in at some point or if it was just added in toto afterward.
I think it was just added afterwards. Yeah.
I think it works for the most part. Like, when the film opening on the beach and then, him kind of starting the narration of the movie, I think it sets the tone in the right direction. I think that's like a noir thing. And I don't think it ever really gets back there, but the fact that they even kind of attempted or approach it, I think they at least understood the source material's basic ideas. Because the source material is humorous, but it's not haha funny. And that's the choice that's being made here is like, again, would this movie have been as successful if it had not been a comedy? Probably not. Realistically, I mean, the movie made a ton of money. It has $8 million budget and made $60 million. Like, that's a lot of money at the time. I mean, even now, if you made a movie for $10 million, you'd be happy to make 6 times your budget back. But I don't think this would have been as successful if this had not been like a straight comedy either, especially in the 80s, which is like the height of this kind of comedy being a thing.
I felt like the narration kicked in a little too early because in the script, you're not sure what his deal is until he gets back to the newspaper room. And so you know right away that he is an investigative journalist and undercover.
Really good point. Yeah.
So that I was like, okay, well, I feel like it would have worked for the audience a little better to not know what he was. Is he a bum too? Is he an undercover cop? Those would have been my 2 thoughts. I wouldn't have thought of journalist right off the top of my head, but he just comes right out with it.
Yeah, actually, I actually agree with you. I think if they had held it back, it might have actually worked a little bit better. Because you're just kind of inundated with
as he gets. Yeah, have it start as he gets to the paper.
Yeah, you were kind of inundated with his bullshit immediately, as it were.
Right. Which, I mean, I think a lot of the narration is there because it's Chevy Chase and he gets to add some more of those lines.
Yeah, more color, just more color to the script. And I think for someone like Chevy Chase, I'm not going to say like less is better, but I think more specific is better with him. Like, give him a specific direction and go with that. Because, I mean, again, like with this character, he is, I don't know. This is the one character that I've seen him play so far where I'm like, I am having a hard time distinguishing between Chevy Chase and the character. It almost just feels like in a lot of ways, just he's in the movie, if that makes sense. It feels like of all the characters we've seen him play so far, this feels like the least put on character that he's played. Really, like maybe, and again, maybe the closest would have been his character in Foul Play, which this character's kind of close to in terms of characterization, but a little. This guy's a little bit more dialed in than Nick was in Foul Play. Yeah, I this is one of those roles where it's like it just kind of strikes me as Chevy Chase just being like, hey, Chevy, just do the Chevy Chase thing throughout, which, yeah, when you said, Mike, like, this is the Chevy Chase movie, like, that's why I think it is, similarly to yourself, because, like, this is just him being him at least the most distillate version of him that I think anyone in the 1980s would have been writing a script for. This is what you want from Chevy Chase, this specific thing, and you're getting it. And I don't think he ever reaches these heights again, which is a shame. And, for me, at least, because I love Chevy Chase as an actor, but this is really, for me, a high watermark in his career. And for those of you listening to this show and haven't seen any other Chevy Chase movies past this might sound like I'm damning the rest of his career, but if you had this high of a watermark in your career, but if you had this high of a watermark as in your career, like it's hard not to acknowledge it. I mean, we'll acknowledge it now, or we can acknowledge it when we're done, but it's just one of those things. Like he ends up getting cast in more things because of this, and further, I think, revealing his weaknesses as an actor, because this is what everyone keeps trying to recapture for a while after this movie. Even the sequel can't recapture the magic of this movie, as much as I love the sequel.
It's odd that with the sequel that they didn't adapt another one of these McDonald books.
Correct.
That they just went all out, on their own. It is interesting, though, too, that this was one of 3 performances that Michael Ritchie directed of Chevy Chase. So that feels like an odd marriage to me. I'm a big fan of Michael Ritchie's other stuff, especially Smile. But even things like Candidate. Yeah, he did a lot of great things.
Bad News Bears, one of my favorites.
I love that movie.
And I know you don't like this movie, but The Survivors is a nostalgic favorite of mine.
Maybe I should give that another shot. I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen it since it was out at the theater. So,
oh well, you might appreciate it a little bit more. I like Walter Matthau, and I just remember watching it a ton as a kid. And The Golden Child is kind of a hoot. I remember.
Speaking of Eddie Murphy,
yeah. I think the only other director he worked with as much, and I could be very wrong about this, I want to say is John Landis, and I don't even know if he worked with him that much. I think twice at least.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, if you look at, so this movie comes out in 85, right? Which is, center of the 80s. Fletch Lives comes out in 89. We have so far in between now and Fletch Lives. We have Funny Farm, Caddyshack 2, Three Amigos, Spies Like Us, European Vacation. We have a bunch of stuff in between now and Fletch Lives. Is it not surprising that Fletch Lives didn't just come out like the next fucking year? You waited almost half a decade to release another one. And then, like you said, Mike, when we get to it, we'll get to it. But diminishing returns is probably being nice to the movie. Because as much as I like it, I have no preconceived notions that it is a pale comparison to this film's successes.
Well, it's kind of like when he had Foul Play. It's like, okay, immediately follow this up with another Goldie Hawn vehicle that you can be in and make this a thing. But it takes 2 years for Seems Like Old Times. And then that's not what we wanted. That wasn't another murder mystery. That was something completely different. I mean, there was a little not really mystery involved in that with the bank robbery. But yeah, it's like, no, listen to what people want here. So continue on. Do Confess Fletch next, and whatever that one is, which I think is the John Hamm one, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the next book. Just fucking do the next book.
I don't know why they didn't, because the plot of Fletch, the plot of that book has to do directly with the money he makes from the end of this movie. And what's, I think the thing that's actually, again, not to kind of give it away, but the movie's been out since 89. I'll just let you guys know, because I don't think either one of you know. Guess what? Fletch Lives doesn't even address this movie at all. So that's fun. There's one line in reference to this. There's one line in reference to the events of this movie in that movie. And it is essentially in the closing minutes of the movie, I believe. Yeah, it's unfortunate, because, again, you had an opportunity to turn this into a serialized thing, even given that that's what Gregory McDonald was doing with the books. We've never gotten a John D. McDonald adaptation contemporary either. They talk about things that they'd been kicking around forever. They'd been talking about doing those books as long as they'd been talking about doing a fucking Fletch sequel.
Well, even before we started recording back to the MCU, and for a while he was on the hook. He was going to be Travis McGee. He was going to do a whole adaptation. I could see Robert Downey Jr. being a much better Fletch, just because he can do those little quips and one-offs. I mean, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang would really show you just like how great he can be at that.
That's still my favorite Robert Downey Jr. performance, really.
Yeah. I don't see him as Travis McGee. And the other person that was trying to do it was Leonardo DiCaprio. And again, he has no gravitas, and really Travis McGee really needs that grit belly.
Yeah. And I mean, again, like, obviously we saw with Fletch being recast, like they didn't go with a comedic actor, at least not one that's like, baseline comedic. I mean, John Hamm is a funny actor, don't get me wrong, his personal issues aside, but he's not a guy that I consider a comedic actor. He's someone that I think is more kind of just an actor who can live within different spheres. But the fact that they spent so long trying to reboot this series and having no ability to do it when there are actors who we could literally rattle their names off from the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s, like 2 or 3 actors from each of those 10 years that could have done this as good or better. Yeah, I don't understand what they didn't understand about the success of this movie. That's kind of what I've never been able to understand about Fletch as an adult, as someone who's, critical and watches films a lot, is what did you not see about what made this film successful that never translated to anything else and had people waiting like damn near 40 years to see another one? Like, I've never been able to understand, because the movie speaks for itself. Like, it's what works with this movie is on screen. There's no trick here. You have a comedic actor who you wrote a comedic script for, and it works like gangbusters. And then all of a sudden they just don't care anymore. And I never get it, because this movie made so much money and it was a Chevy Chase vehicle. And then they just stepped in it every other time from here on out in terms of trying to give him a movie where it's just him doing something.
At Fletch Lives, because I have not seen it, I just wanted to see if anybody returned from this, and it looks like Libertini and the attorney.
Yep, that's it.
I don't even know if he's playing the same character.
Yes, he is. It's George Weiner and Richard Libertini are the only characters that come back. Yeah, I like I said, and it takes place in Louisiana for some reason.
Is J.D. Pepper there?
No, but there are characters like that. Randall Tex Cobb is in the movie.
Oh.
Yeah, everybody's
good.
Good. Said nobody. Yeah,
big fan of Ace Ventura. Come on.
I mean, I am too. I mean, I just know about Randall Tex Cobb in real life. Not a great person. It's a vastly different movie. It's almost like they don't care about the detective part of it, which is the part of this movie that I think works maybe almost to the chagrin of the people writing this movie. It's like, we have to write the detective story into this Chevy Chase movie, but I think it works here. I just think they don't care about it moving forward, which that may be the missing part here, is you needed to have there be an actual mystery and then flesh out the comedy within the mystery. It's not just about Chevy Chase saying Victor Hugo and Pup and Taco over and over again. Like, that will get old and that will go nowhere. And in a lot of ways, that's the state of a lot of modern comedy movies, is just bullshit. I mean, like the improvisation of comedies now without plot. I mean, that's a thing that people have been lamenting for a while now. This, like, just put a camera on people and they'll improv and it'll be funny. Like, or you could write a script and the script be funny and have those actors deliver your funny lines and then improv from time to time. Like, and this is a good case study in that, because I think that the lines that are delivered, like we've already all said, given that we read the script, they're all in the script. It's like Chevy Chase was coming up with these things out of his ass. Like, they're in the script whole cloth. He's just quoting the script.
And that's what you would think, is that was all ad lib from Chevy Chase.
Right. In this day and age, like there's kind of that weird expectation now where it's like, yeah, they're funny people. It's like, being funny doesn't necessarily mean you can like be like that. Some comedians aren't improvisational comedians. They work within the confines of what they know. And I think when Chevy Chase is at his best, it's when someone knows what he is needed to do in the movie. And again, he's the lead here. So they really had to knock it out of the park. And I think they did, but I think it also sets an unreasonable expectation for Chevy Chase's abilities moving forward with other people who do not understand how to write for him as well as Bergman did.
Well, it seems like it was written, at least the final draft was written for him, because I know at the end, they mention him by name and say, some other Chevy Chase will ad lib here, basically, is what they see. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, those throw it against the wall and see what sticks movies that we get these days. It's just like, some of them work. I love Step Brothers, and I know that a lot of it was done that way, and you just keep saying a different line each time and then cobbling it all together. But if you don't have at least a outline of a story and some idea of where things need to go, that's going to be, just a bunch of funny lines.
Then you get Ghostbusters 2016.
Right. That was what I was going to say. I didn't want to keep using that as an example.
I mean, look at the blooper reels for some. I recently rewatched Anchorman, and there are like 10 different versions of the Sweet Odin's beard line that he just says like 10 different things, and it's in the bloopers. And it's like, okay, I'm glad you went with that one, but I don't think you needed to show us all 10 because 9 of those aren't funny. You know why? Because they weren't in the movie. Because they literally weren't in the film.
And this isn't anything new. You can watch at the end of Grumpy Old Men, Burgess Meredith rattle off 15 different lines.
Oh, yeah.
And,
this is not the expectation is different, though. It's the way it's being handled is different.
Well, it's not every line
them all
done.
Yeah. Just keep them all.
I mean, yeah.
What would Ghostbusters 2016 look like with all of that footage left? It'd be like a 12-hour movie of just people just blah, 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 blah. All right, let's do it again.
I mean, I just rewatched the original Deadpool and the whole thing of T.J. Miller describing how Ryan Reynolds looks. I mean, you can tell they use like 2 or 3 ad-libs too many in that section.
You look like a scrotum that fucked an avocado. Yeah, I was just rolling my eyes. I'm like, fuck this shit. Who likes this anymore? But not that specifically. I'm talking about exactly what you're lambasting, which is like leaving them in, like leaving 1 or 2 more in. Like sometimes less is better. And in comedy, sometimes you don't have to bombard the audience with 1,000 jokes. Actually, it would be better if you didn't, because then it shows that you actually have some sort of wherewithal to understand the timing of comedy. Because timing is everything with comedy. It really is. Like it really is. And just ignoring the timing and just plowing through it is not that's Robin Williams, and very few people can do that well, which is just go. Not everybody can do that.
Not unless they're on cocaine.
Well, it was 85.
If only we had been able to get this Kevin Smith version with Jason.
Oh my God. Thank you for bringing that up, Mike.
that would have really sealed the deal and made a real solid entry to the franchise.
I was going to say, before we bring this episode to a close, I think to mention the amount of people that were going to play Fletch at one point, Jason Sudeikis, Jason Lee, who else? I think Zach Braff at one point, Brad Pitt, Jimmy Fallon, Ben Affleck, I think was also mentioned in the Kevin Smith discussions. None of those people would have worked at all. The only one I could maybe see is Jason Sudeikis. Maybe. Ben Affleck would have been no. God. I mean, he can be funny. He's funny in Kevin Smith stuff. He has some of the best lines in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. Fictional characters. He's funny when he wants to be, but what in God's name would Kevin Smith's Fletch have looked like? Just like there was a version of me a long time ago, because that's the other thing. Fletch came out in 85. The most recent Fletch movie didn't come out until I was 32 years old. So there was however many years in between of me just being like, when are they making that Fletch movie? They're making a Fletch movie at some point. Is that Fletch movie happening at any point? Because I mean, again, it was my favorite movie. It is one of my favorite movies. So of course I wanted another one. And yeah, I mean, I've been looking at the Wikipedia for fucking Fletch sequels for 20 years now is what it feels like. And then it finally comes out and it's actually good, which is the other thing, because all these other things that had been mentioned would not have been. There's no universe where Jason Lee would have been a good Fletch, and Kevin Smith directing it would have just been dick and fart jokes, which is fine, but I don't think that would have suited the character of Fletch. And then go watch a movie like Cop Out, and I think the ability to write something like this maybe is made apparent that we dodged a bullet, as it were. I would say anybody who likes Fletch, go check out Confess Fletch, honestly. Like, we're going to be doing an episode on Fletch Lives on this show, but I would say go check out Confess Fletch if this movie is something that you enjoyed, because the Confess Fletch is more of the things that this movie does right than it is the things that this movie doesn't succeed at. And it fleshes out more of the investigative stuff that this movie does do. It does even more of it, which I think, again, it sounds like the three of us are somewhat in agreement that those parts are good and some of the better parts of the movie. So Confess Fletch leans into that even harder, which I think works in its favor.
Confess Fletch. It's very tough to say.
Fucking Christ, man. I just want more Fletch movies with John Hamm now, because like he's so good as the role that I'm kind of like, well, I mean, again, with the movie industry the way it is, and it just kind of got unceremoniously dumped on streaming. I don't know how.
It got a lot of good notice when it came out. I noticed people were talking positively about it, and so you expect that. And
it's Greg Mottola. I mean, I like Greg Mottola a lot. Greg Mottola directed the only Simon Pegg, Nick Frost movie that Edgar Wright hasn't done that almost feels like an Edgar Wright movie with Paul. I mean, Paul is like the fourth Cornetto trilogy movie that isn't but is. So Greg Mottola knows what he's doing, and he wrote the script too, which I think is even more impressive for Confess Fletch. So
I'm good.
Yeah, me too.
What about you, Begley?
Sorry, I got my window open. Somebody was yelling at their kid outside. I'm good.
Cool. Anything else we want to say? Are we good? We're just good? So on the next episode of the Chasing Chevy podcast, we are going to be taking a look at Orange County, which is a more recent film that barely has Chevy Chase in it, but it's a bonus episode. So we'll be taking a look at that. It has Jack Black and Colin Hanks in it. All right.
Is that the one that's written by our own Mike White?
I think so.
I believe it is.
Did you write that movie, Mike?
I sure did. I'm rolling in money.
Yeah. Right. Hey, man.
So,
sit on. Trick it down, as we were talking about yesterday.
Yes.
So until then, where can people find you and the things that you work on, Mark Begley?
You can find my two other podcasts, Cambridge and Michon and Wake Up Heavy, over on weirdingwaymedia.com.
What about you, Mike White?
I do the same thing. You can also find all the stuff that I do over at weirdingwaymedia.com, including the projection booth and the life and times of Captain Barney Miller, the Shabby Detective, yet another Columbo podcast, all kinds of good stuff. How about you, Chris?
Weirding Way Media, that's the place. Go check it out. All the audio diversions that I work on, and even the ones that I don't, but I definitely advocate for, are over at weirdingwaymedia.com. 80s TV Ladies, Cambridge and Michon, the projection booth. I could go on, but you should just go and find out for yourself at weirdingwaymedia.com. Like, rate, and review the show on iTunes, please. Anywhere else doesn't help us as much as iTunes, so iTunes would be the place to go if you're listening to this show to help other fans of Chevy Chase, and maybe Chevy Chase, find our show. I've got to assume at some point he may listen, just based on the fact that I don't think anybody else is doing what we're doing. And, if you're listening, we hope you're enjoying it. If not, we'll catch you on the next episode.